Good morning and welcome to this special edition of Ask the Security Guy. I am your host, Holly Magnuson, and once again, I'm here with Sean Corman. Good morning, Sean.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. Been a busy week, busy day ahead, but we've got some important stuff to talk about. Dealing with some recent events that we have seen in the media, and so we'll kick this off. Couple of reminders. One, if you have questions during the live show, feel free to pop those into the chat. If you're watching this after the fact and you have questions, you can send those. Make sure I bring up that's the wrong one. Let's do this one. If you have questions, please send those to iso@apu.edu. If you send them to spam, they might eventually get to us, but ISO is the best one for questions about what we're going to talk about. Yeah, we have
to actually pay attention to both.
Yes, please. So, Sean, go ahead, kind of introduce to us what we're talking about today.
So I've been getting a lot of questions about what's this new social media. And if you look at things like Wikipedia or Google, you get a kind of skeezy sense for some of these new platforms that are out there. So last year and going into this year already, I've taken some time to investigate the platforms, to dig into their security controls and parameters, and to try to get a sense for who's there.
Mm-hmm.
Are they scammers? Are they political activists? What's the audience like? So I've invested some time in this, and coincidentally, along with that, we've seen fairly aggressive actions being taken by Twitter and Facebook and Google in response to some of these platforms, and in response to, I would say, people with differing viewpoints, even, which has led to almost a mass exodus to some of these platforms. A couple of them are reporting growth of millions per day. And we're seeing it. I can confirm that. The sites are having slowness issues, trying to keep up and scale their hardware up to keep up with the new demand. So it's interesting. So I know that's all very vague. So let's start naming names.
Let's name the names.
The first one out there that I wanted to go over quickly was Parlor. Parler. It billed itself as kind of a Twitter replacement, and its original audience was people who felt disenfranchised on social media, whatever, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, whatever. So Parler was falsely accused of some things, and then they were through what appeared to be a coordinated action by Facebook and Twitter and Google and Amazon, removed from Google and Amazon's hosting platform with very little notice, and their app was also removed from the Google Play Store and the the iTunes Store, citing violations of their policies. So that's an interesting slippery slope that we'll discuss in another show. What they're referring to by their policies is social media outlets are protected by Section 230 of our government's law. And what that basically says is that the providers, Facebook, Twitter, Google, whoever, are not actually publishers and therefore cannot be held liable for the content that is published on them, on their platform. So the interesting challenge that was created in all of this is all of them have successfully fended off lawsuits citing that protection under U.S. law. However, the way it looks right now, and obviously this is evolving, so we'll learn more as time goes on, is that they're saying that Parler, because it was allowing a certain type of speech that they disagreed with, it was in violation of Section 230, and therefore they felt it was their duty to remove it from their platform. End of the day, it's a free market. It's we're in a capitalist economy, and they have the right to do that. And Parler has the right to go find another hosting provider. So, there's a bunch of ethical questions in there that I'm not going to get into because that's really not the purpose of the show. But they're out there. So to talk about the security of Parler. So Parler has a verification process whereby to be a verified user, you would upload some form of government issued ID to be verified, that they could match you. What they would do is they would take a screenshot of your face, and then you would upload some form of ID, and they would match that, ideally through automated machine learning. And if that didn't work, they would fail over to a person comparing the two. And then, so there was this idea that verified Parler users had gone through that process. So you knew you were talking to a person or hearing from a person, not just a bot or something like that. So a month ago, it was right when Parler was taken offline by Amazon. There were a couple Reddit posts, and it showed up in a couple other places that a couple hackers said they had scooped that entire database. It was something like 70 terabytes of information.
Mainstream media as well.
Yeah, and that included the identity verification raw images. Two of the actually well-known security researchers, after that was starting to circulate, got back out on social media and said in very colorful terms that they actually did not have that information, that they had never had that information. Mm-hmm. And that the only information they had grabbed was basically screen scraping information from what was publicly available on Parler. So they were creating a historical archive of all of the information that had scrolled past, as people put it out there. The idea being that they felt that they were gathering damaging or damning information on people who were posting forms of, I guess, what they consider hate speech or promoting violence or so was it a breach? I have yet to see conclusive evidence that there was any form of breach. So to be clear, I have seen no evidence that there is actually a Parler breach. And more recently, the Parler CEO denies that there was ever a breach, which, take that for what it is.
He's going to say that.
Yeah. A lot of companies deny it until they don't have a choice. Right. So that's that. So the next question I get asked is it safe for me to use it, or would you recommend that I use it? And from a security standpoint, I'll say this. There is no risk to you using that platform personally or professionally. Now, there may be risks socially, and your employer may have questions about it. So there are social and other things to bear in mind. But from a pure, is my data safe? Am I safe online? Is my identity safe? There's no more risk on Parler than there is on Facebook or Twitter or any other platform. The next one out there that we wanted to talk about, and I'll kind of breeze through these real quickly. One is called Mewe, MEWE. Kind of bills itself as a Facebook replacement. Another one that's been out there for a while is Gab, gab.com, gab.com. And what's the other one? Rumble, which is billing itself as a YouTube replacement.
Hmm.
Um, and there's more coming. Signal, with the announcement from WhatsApp that they were changing their privacy policy, Signal saw so much growth that they were actually knocked offline for a short period of time, about a week ago, just from signups.
Wow.
And there's another platform out there called Telegram, which is, it's hard to categorize it. It's in there with kind of Twitter, but kind of not, kind of Discord, kind of not. It's strange. But it's a different platform. Like I said, I'm having a hard time categorizing it. Others may be more successful. So Telegram is being billed as a secure way to group chat. Now you've heard me go off about this before, where when we talk about LastPass, one of the reasons I love LastPass is no one at LastPass has access to my data,
right,
ever. With Telegram, they are billing themselves as secure end-to-end encryption. So in their group chat model, where you have a group of people on a chat, or a channel, however they refer to it, there is a point where you connect from your client, your phone or your computer, to their servers, and then they relay the connection out to the other folks, whoever's in the group. So there's a brief point where the data is unencrypted on their servers. So technically, it's at that point where Telegram employees may have access to unencrypted data streams. Now, they also have a piece of functionality called secret chat, in which case that is a pure end-to-end encrypted tunnel. And then the last concern I have with them is they're using their own encryption protocol called MT-Proto, which, just from a philosophical standpoint, and most encryption engineers will tell you this, you generally don't want to roll your own crypto. You're going to miss something. So there's been no evidence of a breach, or there's been no vulnerabilities, published about it. It's just from a more academic side of my brain saying, maybe it just should have used something that was already well known.
Right.
So I've had people ask me questions about who had legitimate needs for high security communications, and I actually warned them away from Telegram for their specific needs and moved them over to Signal, because Signal does have true end-to-end encryption. However, those were kind of extreme circumstances. So what I would say to most people is, unless you have a extreme need for that kind of security, Signal's great, and their interface is dramatically improved. But Telegram may suit your use case better, and it's okay. The encryption is not bad. It's just they have that minor blip in the middle that I'm uncomfortable with, and that's mainly because of what I do for a living.
So, Sean, as we think about these different platforms that are out there, what should if I'm considering going to one of them, what should I look for in any type of platform like this?
So you're looking for some form of two-factor authentication support, which all of these support, either SMS or time-based OTP, which they all support. What's interesting about them all, and we've talked about this before, Facebook and Twitter and all these other platforms, one of the draws to them and one of the reasons why they've grown so much is they're free. Except they're not. So what you pay with Facebook and what you pay for with YouTube and all of these other platforms that you don't actually pay for, you pay with your privacy. You, by default of using their free service, give them access to monitor your online activities. With Gab, with Mayway, we'll see what Parlor does when they get back online. With Rumble, all of these platforms have an unpaid, a free service, and a paid version, and they're doing it differently. Even if you're on the free version, they all have very clear privacy statements, which are very different than what you'll see with Facebook or Instagram or any of the others. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to sell you additional features and functionality with their pro version. So it's a different model. You have the free version, which is kind of like the bike with the training wheels on it, or you can upgrade to a big person's bike and have all the bells and whistles. And they're all pretty consistent about that. The other question I have is, and this is a little, it's not really a security question, but it comes across my desk a lot. And that is, are they safe environments to be in? And my answer to that is they're no different than any of the others. So if you're worried about false information, if you're worried about trolls and spammers and those kinds of things, there's no difference. The only difference I've seen between them is the lack of moderation on these new platforms, because they are really, really, really pushing this idea of free speech without moderation. That doesn't mean you can't block and report users. You absolutely can on all of them. And that's your choice. But what they're pushing is this idea that it is your choice as to who you block, who you report, what information you choose to consume or not. Whereas Facebook and Google and Instagram and Twitter they're entering into some very potentially dangerous territory in terms of how they're doing moderation from a legal standpoint. So some of the actions they're taking are creating a legal question around their publisher status. So that has there's a lot of legal questions to that I can't answer. And frankly, I don't want to. I'm looking at this from a security perspective. So I guess to sum it all up, I mean, we've looked at Gab, we've looked at Mayway, we've looked at Parlor, we've looked at Rumble and Telegram and Signal. I have found no major security issues with any of them. They all offer good controls. They all offer good authentication mechanisms. They all offer good protections to your data and privacy. Their privacy policies are stellar, which is, I find that unbelievable that I would actually say that out loud. But there you have it, first time for everything. So I can't say I would discourage anyone from trying them out, or if they choose to move to them. I found no reason to speak out, either for or against them.
Right.
What I will say is they have taken a much stronger stance towards protecting your privacy than I've seen with the others, mainly because their business model is not built around monitoring your activities.
Yeah, they're not making their money off of our information.
Exactly. So because of the just the difference in business model, it's much easier for them to take a very different approach.
Yeah.
And that's territory that Facebook and Twitter in particular, and Google. I mean, they're advertisers. That's how they make their money, is by they monetize your behavior.
Mhm.
and what you do online. And they sell that information and they use that information. And the problem gets into it when there are breaches like Cambridge Analytica with Facebook. That was a huge breach. So when you're collecting that information, you automatically dramatically increase your risk of losing it
Right.
or it being misused. The other thing I've heard from people, and I've actually noticed it myself, is had a number of people say, "Well, I was having a conversation about something, and the next thing I know, it showed up in my Facebook feed with advertisements. Is my phone listening to me?" So the bottom line is, um, there is no admission that or evidence that I've seen that your phone is listening to you or your computer's listening to you. Um, they are using algorithms that are behavioral based. So you may have typed in a search term, you may have looked for something, you may have an old email that they're correlating off of and predicting what you're going to be interested in. And their ability to predict what a person is going to be interested in is eerie, because they're doing deep data mining that, by virtue of the fact that you have an account with them, you've allowed.
Yeah.
Go
ahead.
So yeah, this is one of those. It's a tough conversation because there's so many intersections between security and privacy with these platforms.
Well, and I was just going to say, as we kind of wind up, any of these platforms, some of the basic same principles apply. Not oversharing your information.
Yeah.
And that's super important. Especially if you've got teenagers or younger kids that are into social media, reminding them, nobody needs to know where you live.
Yep.
Type thing.
And it really brought to mind too the other show we did a while back of how to search for truth.
Mm-hmm.
So I had someone say to me very, very aggressively that they didn't believe anything they were going to read on these platforms. I said, well, do you believe anything you read on Facebook? Do you believe anything you see on your TV? Because they're all questions.
Mm-hmm.
The only way I have certainty is when I go and I check things out for myself.
Yeah.
And I look at the source data myself. And then, and there's a biblical principle tied to that, where Paul would encourage the church to be like the Bereans.
Mm-hmm.
And I encourage all of our listeners to be Bereans in all things.
Yeah.
If you and even if you're hearing it from me, go check it out for yourself.
Don't trust Sean.
I don't trust people. I don't know why you would. But yeah, I encourage people. I mean, especially in this day and age where there's so much information that is claimed to be misinformation by one side or another. Mm-hmm. I would encourage people not to accept what anybody says and go search for the truth yourself.
Right. So, I think with that, any final thoughts, and we'll wind this up.
Again, just to reiterate, we've looked at these platforms, and from a usage standpoint, from a security standpoint, mm-hmm. they present no additional risk. The audiences aren't strange. Actually, that is one point I do want to hit on. Wikipedia, which is a very popular source for people to do verification. All of the pages, with the exception of Signal, and this was only true about a week ago when I last looked at Signal's page, have been altered with misinformation. So Mayway, Gab, Parlor, Rumble, all of these new platforms have had their Wikipedia pages corrupted and are awful. So you're going to have to do your own research, because even the Wikipedia stuff, I can't. I mean, Wikipedia was always, take it with a grain of salt because it's user-based and user-driven. What I saw with these sites in particular, and then I started expanding my search, there's so much disinformation on Wikipedia now, I can't even recommend it for your use.
Right.
Unless you're looking for, look for the references to see if they take you to good information. So bear that with a grain of salt. I'm sorry. Wikipedia, was a great idea, and I think it still is a great idea. It's just currently going through some very difficult times, as our society is going through some very difficult times. And I think it's just being reflected there.
So with that, I'll remind you, and if you have questions later on, feel free to reach out to us at iso@apu.edu. We love to get your questions, and I will try to answer them if I can. If it's over my head, I will definitely pass it up to Sean. So with that, we'll say goodbye. Have a great day.
All right. Thanks.